Amazing. Yeah, we'll see. Spring could go either way.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Come on up, right?
You're legit. You gotta,
I'm somebody.
How are you?
Good, good, how are you?
okay, this is the first committee meeting, for this committee this calendar year. And Justin Black actually isn't expected to be here today, and I failed to inform Carrie of that, so he wasn't expected. We don't have any items that we did before. Eric Marlowe is the citizen alternate, and he had given us his availability, but we weren't sure if he was gonna make it or not. So it doesn't look like he'll make it, or if he does, he'll end up being late. So because this committee doesn't yet have a chairperson, I'll just sort of lead it off, and then the chair, whoever that ends up being, can take over. So your first item is the appointment of the chair. The bylaws require that the chair and vice chair be the board members of the committee. So the two of you can kind of decide who wants to be chair and vice chair.
Rock, paper, scissors.
May I nominate you for chair? Yeah, maybe this next time.
Alright, I'll accept, thank you.
Thank you.
So by default, then
Yes. I'm
the vice chair is Glenn as well. Okay.
Okay, so we move on to the waste management update. We have representatives.
We do. I wanted to go, so yeah, Stacy's here from Waste Management, just by way of background. Waste Management is the district's franchise hauler for all of our garbage services. So there are, I think like kind of 3 items from Waste Management we wanted to kind of talk about. And if we can pull up, let's start with just what I sent here, the easy thing. So our franchise agreement specifies certain bonus services, if you will, for the community. And that those didn't change when we transitioned from Mid-State Solid Waste to Waste Management, because the agreement remains in place. One of which is to provide this residential spring cleanup program. And so it's being provided the same way that it has historically been provided. And Waste Management, this flyer you should have received this flyer in their most recent bill. I think that was just a couple weeks ago it went out.
Right.
So it's a service available. I don't know how many people do it or participate in it.
So I've only been up here for a little over a year and a half now since we've taken over from Mid-State, and we get quite a bit of participation in it. It's been good. One thing to note, I know it says take your e-waste to Chicago grade, but we can also accept it at our transfer station here locally. We just can't pick it up for you. So if you bring it to us, we can take it. So that's another option that's not on the flyer. But yeah, any questions? I know we have the local numbers there on the line. I think most of your residents are pretty familiar with the program. I know, Naveed, we had a problem with your green waste, one of them, a while back. But those things happen. We'll take care of it. Just have us call any of us. I think everybody has our local numbers, so not a problem. Whatever you guys need.
So it's kind of a no cost additional collection.
For the compost event, so pick up 1 free yard of compost. Do you guys still deliver that too? There was a delivery. I know it was.
We went away from the smaller deliveries. I just don't have the equipment to do small deliveries anymore. That was something that the former owners of Mid-State had that they kept in part of the purchase agreement. So I know Mid-State used to do that. We do have it available at our transfer station. If somebody wants larger quantities, I could deliver that at a price.
Yeah.
But the small, I know they were doing some small delivery like dump truck things, and
Yeah.
I just don't have that equipment.
Okay, all right.
And I got some complaints about that last year. So last spring was the first year that Waste Management was in, and so we reviewed the franchise agreement, and that delivery component is not part of the franchise agreement. It's just something that Mid-State had made available. Because it was pretty low cost. I think it was like $10 or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get a pizza delivered for $10.
Then, okay, and then the green waste, that's gonna be another day.
Yeah.
No.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's in the fall.
Yeah.
Fall. So that's the first item. The second waste management item I wanted just to make sure you heard from us is, you may recall, or you may not recall, but, when TCSD set rates for, solid waste, the most recent time was in 2022. The franchise agreement calls for an adjustment based on the CPI to the rates charged. That CPI is the prior calendar year, and it takes effect each April. The Prop 218 notice that we prepared back in 2022 pre-notified yourselves and your customers that this adjustment would be taking place. So Waste Management has informed us, and we have confirmed that the CPI, the effect that's under the franchise agreement, was 3.42%. So effective April 1st, Waste Management can increase their rates by 3.42% to customers. For across the board services, we're still in the midst of kind of finalizing. There's just a couple little items that we want to confirm or finalize with the rate sheet that Waste Management uses. But I'll expect that that'll be resolved, and as soon as they're able to actually put that in place, I assume it'll be in place for April 1st. I believe the bill that I got most recently was for February and March, so the bill that goes out next will be for April and May for residential customers. And that rate will be in effect through next April unless there's for some reason, there's a petition for another review of rates.
You guys have,
Every April one to adjust, or is it just this year?
It's every April 1st.
Every, okay.
Yeah, our current Prop 218 notification will cover rates through April 1st of 2027. And then the one after that, even though the franchise agrees the calls for it, we would have to do a new Prop 218 notification.
Okay.
you guys have a great general manager that's been very helpful with helping us, my finance team kind of figure all of that out. So thank you for your help.
I don't know about all that.
Oh, no, you're very helpful.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
And just speaking of the rates, I know when we had talked a little bit before about the rates, I had mentioned, or we discussed possibility of using 20-gallon garbage cans. Has that been, but you guys were gonna go back and figure out if that's possible. Has that been
So,
discussed?
well, it's not in our current franchise agreement, right? That'd be an amendment to our contract agreement if you guys wanted to do that.
Okay.
We used 20 gallons at one time in Tascadero. The issue is kind of more with our trucks and the ability to, we end up throwing those in the truck half the time because they're so small. So, if it's something you guys really want, we could make arrangements to do that, but again, it would be an amendment to the current franchise.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. Questions?
Okay, one more item on waste management, and this will require a little bit of a little imagination. Our franchise agreement very briefly notes that one of the services that Waste Management or the franchise hauler, whoever it is, and hence it's Waste Management now, provides is collection of what's called public containers on Main Street. So I failed to get the picture of what we had on Main Street previously, up until, the last couple months, but they were something like this. They were a wine barrel that had been cut the top off of, and a trash can went inside, and it wasn't fancy and hinged like this, I don't think, but they were something like what you see in this picture. And I believe they were in about 10 locations or something. They're just in a couple of blocks along Main Street and Mid-State. And additionally, there were some recycling containers that didn't match this. They were like a commercially built small recycling container that were in some of those, but not all of those locations that were serviced by Mid-State and then up until recently, Waste Management. Sometime within the last few months, I don't exactly know the exact date, it was determined that the containers themselves were not serviceable. I think what Jessica told me was the wine barrels were kind of falling apart. Probably the rings fall off and the barrel just kind of.
We have some disappear, some literally fall apart.
So, that led to some folks on Main Street kind of complain, where did the trash container go? Those complaints went to Mid-State and they came to me. And so, Waste Management, they came to me as well. Waste Management said, well, who provides the container? And it's unclear at this point. I'll say that's not a resolved issue. The agreement doesn't specify if the hauler provides the container or if the district provides the container, and I don't have any personal knowledge of who provided the containers originally. And it may not matter if we're able to get funding some other way. But the first issue became, what do we do in the meantime? And I said, well, I don't want to just eliminate the service because it's spelled out in the agreement. And so what Waste Management did is they've temporarily placed small residential carts in those same locations. And so there's right now a place for someone walking down Main Street to throw their trash away that is collected by Waste Management, but they're not a very decorative, it's a residential cart that doesn't, it's just not a decorative container or a container that looks like it belongs on the sidewalk permanently. So, Waste Management and I met a few weeks ago and said, well, what are our options going forward? And Waste Management had begun to do some inquiries to determine if maybe IWMA might have some funding to pay for new containers for Main Street. We don't necessarily want to immediately go back to servicing this kind of container, even though they look nice. The Waste Management doesn't, and I agree that the reason is there's a lot of manual labor involved. You've got to pull out this can, this bag, and the waste industry's moved away from that because of injuries for decades now, injuries to the staff. Although I don't know that that's a particular problem on Main Street. These containers didn't get a ton of use. They weren't super full or heavy, but it's still a manual way. There's a lot of manual labor involved, and that's not the way they service any other containers in general in the service area. So I asked Waste Management to come up with some alternates that we could review before we figure out what we want on Main Street. And Jessica and Stacy came up with some samples. The first sample, and I'll speak for Stacy, the easiest one for them to service is something that works just like a cart that can be picked up without any by the truck without any intervention. I don't know if that's the right term, but it could just be serviced. So this is essentially like a 96 gallon cart with a modified lid that allows for disposal. I don't that's not what I had pictured for Main Street, but this is what I think. I'll speak for Stacy and say this is what would be easiest to service.
Easiest to service, correct. And it can be changed to color. That's an ugly looking part.
about
I will agree on that.
Do we really need 95 gallons?
No, I mean, it can be smaller, sure, but as far as servicing, it probably doesn't matter if it's 95 or smaller. It's the shape of the container is how the truck picks it up. It's got these arms that reach out and grab the container. And then it's an automated side loader container, and that's how residential customers in Templeton are served. And so it'd be easier for Waste Management to serve these public containers if they could be serviced the same way. So I think that's why, I'm speculating, but I'm sure that's why this was proposed. Then a couple other options came up. I think these are also essentially automatically serviced, this style.
Correct. We have those out in Simi Valley. We have those parts at all bus stops and stuff. Those have a weighted bottom. I believe they're filled with sand. Similar type issue with the 20 gallons because of the weight in the bottom. They tend to fall into our trucks periodically, but those are an option.
So the whole container gets picked up. It just got some weight on the bottom. The whole container gets picked up by the truck. So you place them where it doesn't require any intervention to pick them up.
Do they also come in other colors?
Yeah. Any color you'd like.
Does the lid just flop open like the?
Correct. That has a centrifugal type lid, so when we turn it upside down to dump, the lid opens up.
Oh,
So the lid stays closed when it's down. But yeah, absolutely.
And then I said, well, I don't know that these would necessarily be seen as attractive options on Main Street. What else could be available? And I asked Jessica specifically, could they come up with samples of containers where I understood the need to manually lift the refuse out of the container, but maybe there was other options that would have like a housing where the container could be pulled out, picked up by the truck and then put back into the housing. And so these other samples kind of came through. Actually, this one might be an automated service, right?
Similar, correct.
Similar service. This is this more canister type where the door opens up, a container rolls out, that's then serviced by the truck. And then someone has to push the thing back in the box, in the cabinet. And here's another similar sample. These things are all pretty expensive, but these are the samples that that Waste Management came up with. So just so I understand, Stacy, the container that's inside this cabinet is serviceable by a.
Yeah, I
automated-
believe so. I believe we could fit one of our smaller 32-gallon carts inside there and it should work. I haven't actually physically touched one of those to see. This was just after we talked to quick browse through the internet to see what we could find with some of our suppliers. And these were just a couple of options that we came up with.
Yeah, I mean, the ones on the latter page, this one and the one above, and that one, and the one right above, I think that one, yeah, are obviously the most like aesthetically pleasing. I do feel like not this one, the other two down below, probably because they're closed in terms of not having an open portion, maybe odor control might be better.
Could be, I don't know. I don't know how these containers are used from a sort of a scientific standpoint. I think when we have a lot of activity on Main Street, like the Friday night cruise nights and 4th of July. 4th of July is different because actually containers come out for that event specifically, but the sort of day-to-day use is probably fairly limited. You know, we don't have a ton of pedestrian activity on Main Street, so I don't know how they were probably serviced weekly before, but I don't think they were full weekly on a typical basis. Or if a lot of material was a problem, or what's in fact in them, you know, like trash from kids who are walking from the market back to the skate park or whatever. That kind of
Cars
stuff.
got full pretty quick.
For sure.
Dog waste. Because we don't have a ton of sort of to-go kind of restaurants and things like that, or, you know, along this section of Main Street.
So there's 10 of them?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Approximately.
Yeah.
How far apart are they?
Well, I know on this block over here, there were maybe 2 on each side of the block between.
Kind of one on each corner. So there's one at the rec, and then there's one at Jack's also.
Yeah. And then there were, at least at some of those locations, those recycling containers, which are gone now too, I believe. And, you know, we ought to examine at some point, once we figure out what we want as far as container style, how many make sense? It doesn't make sense to me to require if some never got any use at all, then what's the point of putting it back? And otherwise, what are we trying to collect in here? Is it just garbage, recycling and organics, et cetera? You know, so I think you probably notice, you know, now most of the time are these outdoor self-service containers. In newer establishments, you'll see blue, green, and black at every location because we're required to be source separating along the way. But that may or may not make sense on Main Street, Templeton, but eventually that's ultimately what we need to get to. So I just, since this was a current topic and we're working this out, I wanted to get some feedback from the committee about, you know, what do you want to see out there? We have yet to, you know, work out, you know, how those are, what containers make sense. If we're gonna replace what we had, so they're gone now, it makes sense to me that it'd be easier to service.
Those last two, they're pretty easy to service with, the one on the next one, is that the one also?
These two are, I think, kind of similar in terms of there's a locking cabinet, and then
Okay,
you roll out a small cart. So the way the trucks work, the way I have observed them working, I don't know if all of them do, is in this case, it would require the driver to get out of the truck, which is obviously something that the waste manager is gonna try to want to avoid. And then roll the container out of the cart to the automated container and then activate the arms and then put it back and then get back in the truck. So you're still talking about getting in and out of the truck to do that servicing, but they're not having to actually empty the container. So it's lower risk to waste management employees than what we did previously, but not necessarily quicker. Does that sound right?
Correct.
And if you had something more like, I don't know if this is automated, it looks like it is. It's like it's. If it was placed in the right place, it looks like this container could be collected.
It does look like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Those, if they're placed curbside and the truck can get to it, then this might be able to be emptied without any driver having to get out of the vehicle.
And how much is it? Oh, we don't know.
No, I don't know. I was just showing like examples of, you know, aesthetically, what do you know, and so this is similar to this, but
Yeah.
more neutral.
Yeah.
Imagine those bright green and bright blue ones can come in other colors as well.
Yeah.
They don't have to be.
They-
they're
no,
probably
yeah.
identifiably like green waste or recycling.
They could, look, we reached out to IWMA to see if they have grant money available.
Yeah.
Right, to see, they're gonna wanna go with state.
They will, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
that
just,
makes
I'm just,
sense.
you know.
I think the trend is we're having
Well,
to,
with giving us money.
they're requiring it now. You know, Treasury Bureau says when these containers, new containers are brought to your home, like ignore the whole what's on Main Street thing, but under state law, the containers have to be color coded. They have to be black or gray for refuse or green for organic and or recycling. So
And then that was my next question though. So are we planning, how are we gonna do this if we have to have, like for recycling too? So are we gonna put one corner just garbage, another corner be recycling?
I think if you're gonna end up with two or three, they need to be at the same location. Otherwise, they're just gonna be used, whatever's most convenient. You'll just someone will just drop it in. We really didn't get into that level of detail. I was wondering, okay, well, we can't just take the containers away. We at least have to do what we've been doing while we figure this out. So we have this right now we have containers that are there temporarily. I don't think it's a good long-term solution because the containers that are there probably gonna disappear. I don't know if any have yet, but they will. And that's gonna become eventually a burden for waste management, and they're ugly.
So the budget, money will be coming from the,
Well, I think the original thought was, you know,
IWMA.
I don't know that, you know, we could do further research to determine, was the district involved in the purchase of the original containers? Was that a mid-state thing or maybe a Wilmar thing? I don't know, because the services have transitioned over the years from one provider to the next. Nobody here knows for certain, and nobody with waste management knows for certain either. They pre-exist all of us. I haven't done a lot of digging into that. Waste management suggests that maybe we could, if IWA funds it, then the district's not funding it, waste management not funding it. That's
Worry
probably
about it in
fine.
20 years.
Yeah, worry about it next time. But before I asked IWA, I said, well, let's figure out what it is that we're asking them to be, or what it is that we would be requesting.
If we scroll down the other options, do we know, one more down, like this one and then the last one? I guess they do come in other colors if we were eventually gonna add.
You could go other colors or even signage on them that would
Okay.
say what it was for, if in fact, I mean,
Think of
So-
Costco, if you go to Costco, how they have the threes.
Yeah.
and stuff, right?
yeah, I would think that in order to be like really compliant with 1383, there'd be a cabinet like this that had 3 containers and they would open up and the to service them, we'd have to pull all three out and then put them all back in.
Yeah, I mean. I like the one with the foot pedal. With, not having to necessarily, folks having to actually touch the receptacle in order to utilize it. I like the look of that one. And I like that, I feel like the contents are contained. It could be enclosed when it's not at use, and same reason for the next bottom one. And then if it turns out that there's a huge cost between all of these, the one up above, that sort of like concrete, that concrete looking one, also is not offensive, like appearance wise.
Yeah, my only concern with the one below it is the foot pedal is probably gonna break.
Yeah.
The mechanical things and people and the braking.
We've had those in our house, in our homes,
I mean, that's what like San Francisco uses, and I've never seen them break. I don't know, but like I think they're hopefully
pretty
pretty
durable.
industrial, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
The-
it's not a thin piece, they're like substantial footpad pieces.
the containers that we had previously, none of them had a door or they were open on the top, so you just drop something in. I'm not aware of any odor complaints, but I think you're right, to the extent you put something odorous in there, it's gonna come out. I think the containers, I don't have a scientific background in here, but I think the containers that are open, as opposed to having a door, more of the trash is likely to end up in the container as opposed to in front of the container or spilled. So when you have, if you have to manually enter a door, it's easy to not get everything that you're throwing.
And the one at the
into it.
bottom with the flap.
Yeah. I'm sure you've been to like a fast food place or
Yeah,
something,
the
trying
flap
to,
one.
you try not to touch it and like, it's like,
Bounces back at you.
yeah. So we have not, I'm not aware of problems with those open on the top containers. I think the reason that oftentimes this style is used, where it's just like a side load, is because then when it rains, the rainwater doesn't end up in there. But otherwise, what we had out there before, had a lid that was something, the holes were round, but there was an open.
It's like if
hole
you
on
use the
top.
wine barrel as a tabletop, right, but with a
Yeah.
hole cut in the middle for the trash, right? Metal container in the middle. My concern with the ones that are locked would be access, like we emptied the trash can all the time, cause ours gets full, right? Like kids are dumb, but they use trash cans and that's beautiful. But we would empty ours, fairly regularly during certain times of year. So making sure that like if it's a locked one that's like actually closed, we could get into it to deal with, the trash that's in there.
So that,
Because
that
if it does
location,
get full, so our location, but we get all the foot traffic between the skate park and
The park and the
liquor
market.
store and the market, so.
so, I mean, this was I think these were like 33-gallon cans that were inside here, does that sound right?
Sounds right.
Okay, something like, so I guess I'd say if that's all of these other styles are gonna be probably double the
Yeah,
capacity.
that's fair.
Not all of them, this would be smaller, but these other style, like this is a 65-gallon, so about double the capacity.
I'm just leaning towards the one that's,
The gray.
plastic leftover trash,
Like this,
This
Yeah.
one or,
that one.
yeah,
In the past, we haven't had any problems with cats or other animals trying to, raccoons or something.
I'm not aware of any, but
No, we got a possum out with one of the trash cans one time, it got itself stuck in the big bowl of the skate park. So we put the trash can in there and put it in there, and then we released it in the garden.
yeah, I think.
But we
that-
haven't had any trouble with it stuck in there.
Oh, okay. Or
Oh, yeah,
trying to
that
climb
would
in.
be-
Yeah,
or something
yeah.
else.
Yeah,
But I mean,
sort
if
out
we
some fish bones.
If we could maybe with this, discussing with IWMA, if we could find options where we could also have separate our trash, that would be nice too.
yeah, I think what you're looking at is probably having to have multiple containers at every location. Like, at least, I don't know how much organic waste is generated in the downtown. I mean, some food waste, but And now actually, you know, to the extent that you've got compostable containers becoming more common and dirty paper products can go in the organic container. I don't know how good, I mean, my guess is that those are not, even at Costco where they're lined up properly. My imagine is there's a lot of contamination in all three of those containers.
For sure.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but, well, I mean, you wanna, is this like, is there some consensus that something like this would work? Let's keep investigating it.
Yeah. So, and we, can we like customize it with any sort of logo or anything like that?
I'm sure we could.
Yeah, I'm sure we can put some vinyl signing on it or signage.
Yes.
I think we're gonna certainly have to put, especially if they're like a neutral color, we're certainly gonna have to put green or blue or, you know, to indicate what goes in each container.
And these are weighted, right? So like. hopefully
Correct.
that would help
I
to
think it
determine.
says they're
40
40
pounds.
pounds on this one. The ones above it were like 100 pounds. The ones above it didn't work very well for sustainability, because like I said, we'd end up throwing them in the truck, and I don't have any
Yeah.
experience with this, but I can ask around from my peers.
Yeah, I mean, this one looks like if you saw it, it's meant to be there. The other ones, like the ones above kind of look a little temporary to me. This looks like.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to put them back and leave them in those locations you know, for years to come. And so, you know, I think the white barrel ones looked great, but they are,
Not sustainable.
well, they're difficult to service. They're time consuming to service.
They require a lot of human power.
Okay, so we'll investigate something along these lines and we'll inquire with IWMA about funding and what, if there is funding, what the minimum requirements are.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah. Okay.
Anything else from Waste Management?
Wow, easy. Thank you guys for making it easy for me. Have a great day.
Thanks for coming.
Take care.
Thanks, Stacy.
You got it. Take care, Jeff. See you guys.
A review of 2016 Parks and Recreation. Please.
Probably did something pretty far. I know what I hear. All these little steps. Okay, I've asked, Melissa's gonna kind of lead this review. And just to, as I'm passing this down, the district performed a Parks and Recreation Master Plan back in that was finalized in early 2016. So I think this effort probably started in 2015.
2015, yeah.
And we're making a point of going through each of the existing master plans with the appropriate committee. And in this case, there were some other items that I kind of wanted to get to, so we thought it might be a good idea just to go through the highlights of the existing master plan.
Yeah, so, okay, so the master plan is several, it's like 100 and something pages. It was good to review actually, after putting so much effort into it back in 2015 and 16. So there was, in its creation, there was a committee that was involved in its creation, representing various aspects of the community. So we were involved as the district, and we had obviously the Park and Rec committee members involved. But we had some members from the community involved as well, so that it felt like we were hearing from, you know, multiple aspects of users of recreation in the community. So, you know, a lot of this is gonna be, you know, lots of background on Templeton and where Templeton was at the time, and then using the county build-out plan for where we were estimating Templeton for going, right? So there's, without going to all these, I don't think these are clickable links, which is rough, yeah. There is a lot of, you know, gathering like the existing resources that we had, right? What do we have now? And it's not just the TCSD parks and facilities that we were addressing as ours, but anything that the community could use, right? So things like the dog park got in there, the gyms at the schools, because we do have access to those as TCSD. You know, all of our existing facilities. And then a look at our demographics, right? As far as like, how are people using those facilities? What does this community look like right now? some criteria for planning parkland, which is the idea of, I think there's like a 3 acres of park per person, sort of as a national standard, which we don't hit necessarily, parks and open space. But everyone in Templeton does live within 1 mile, within Templeton CSD boundaries especially, lives within 1 mile of a park, which is pretty cool, of a usable park. There's a lot of discussion about non-traditional parklands, things are just open spaces that people can use. And then again, looking at, what the national standards are and where we are heading, right? So when we look at the county at the time was looking at, I wanna say build out for Templeton was somewhere around 25,000. It was significant and within 30 years of where we are now. So obviously COVID put a big, stickler in that and, building costs and things get in the way. So there hasn't been a lot of building since this was released. Cause part of the huge benefit to the master plan, aside from guiding, what the community wants and what we need to be providing, where identifying, where our areas for improvement, where we lack, right? Was also, if we're starting at a deficit in park land, how are we gonna get to where we need to be, for what the county is expecting for build out, right?
Is that the section that I read talking about increasing our acreage by 19 acres?
Yes,
Okay, to coincide with the development growth of the district to 15,000?
correct. That is correct. So, this is AECom did a great job of developing a very robust master plan for us. Probably more than what we were expecting and not in a negative way. So then we get into all these, sort of recommendations, right? Oh, it was a clickable link. Look at that. So the recommendations for what, we needed to, reach in order to meet what our expectation was, were fairly significant. Fairly significant. We don't have many bikeways here. Some of the recommendations are things that we don't have control over, frankly. Roads, trails, bike paths, things like that. But they are things that we can throw weight behind as far as supporting if the county is going to do something like that. Or, continuous requesting of the county to do things, like this. A lot of our trails kind of came through and Safe Routes to School came through in the form, all these, I should have not clicked on that clickable link, sorry. Has all these maps that were gotten from like alltrails.com or something. So that's a little disappointing because we don't have, it was one member of the committee's big, request was that we don't have a lot of trails in Templeton. There's like the Vineyard Corridor Trail along the vineyards, right? There's a little bit up at Toad Creek, but most of our property tends to be either public roads or private property. So we are a bit limited with that. And then, sorry, this is going all the way back to the table of contents here, guys, sorry, because so yeah, all these figures that you can see that are showing all of that. The other part that we really needed to tie into all this potential for growth, right, was the cost. How are we gonna get there? At the time, our development impact fees for Parks and Rec were pretty nominal. I think they were developed in the mid-90s, I wanna say, prior to this, right? So it had been a good 20 years since we had done any real updating to those. And once we had this master plan, we could look at we could look at increasing the development impact fees because we could tie it to specific data that was contained within this master plan. We know what we have, we know what we need, we know where we need to get. This is the way we see getting there, right? So the funding sources, obviously, identified as, on here, like there's grants and sponsorships. But a big source of that was gonna be the capital improvement fees that are charged for development impact. And as a reminder, although I don't know that I need to remind Naveed necessarily, the Quimby fees are collected by the county and they are kept and maintained by the county. And they are spent, the county divides their areas into districts. And so Templeton is part of a North County district. I don't remember the name of it. But Templeton is part of a North County district, so those Quimby fees can be spent in that North County district. And typically it is not, we do not see them coming to Templeton, right? They will say they use some to repave the driving in area of.
Yeah, those
of
pavers
the-
that
Those
are-
pavers were used, Quimby fees were used for that. They redid the restrooms, I wanna say it was around the time of this master plan. But the rest of it, as we've seen, a lot of the growth has been happening in places like Shandon Park or in San Miguel Park. Cause there are other funding sources that are available to them for the lower income areas of the county, so. Yeah, so that's what I have. Do we wanna go to that, the funding source? There was a. Sorry, I did not have this written down. But talking about the development impact fees section.
That's next, all right.
Yeah, I have a separate item.
Okay, well, that's perfect.
But
So that's what we have for the master plan.
Um,
We can go wherever you like. I'm
Um,
very excited about this.
Can we go to page 70?
Of course we can.
I know a lot of the things, that were articulated as like
Right.
next steps or things for us to work on. You mentioned like we have not had the ability to, but I wanted to know,
Can you push that like up, bigger button plus sign, so there's.
yeah. Okay, so I wanted to know the status of some of these things.
Yes, let's go.
Evers, we wanted to talk, we have a improvement plan for, yeah, can you just like talk about some of these and what is the status of them?
So let's, for item one A and B, we have a
Yeah.
separate agenda item to cover
Okay,
whatever. So,
yeah.
okay, we can go to number two, let's see.
Mhm. So that's when we hit the 15,000, which we have not, so, not really an issue at the moment, right? Number
Well,
two.
I mean, I think the idea is there's actually a table in here that shows that would have been incrementally increased. So as population grows, we should be adding parkland. Now, since 2016, the population has not grown much.
Mhm.
Maybe we're 700 people more-ish. in that-
Yeah, I think
that
that-
9
yeah.
years.
I think I looked at this, census data and it's not a big jump.
But nonetheless, we need to be, it takes a long time to develop parkland and those kinds of things. And so if you wait until if the
Right.
goal is, okay, we want 19 acres by the time we're at 15,000 people, we can't wait till we're 14,500 to accomplish that. Cause it'll take only to identify the park location, identify funding sources, purchase land, develop a park, all those things. It's gonna take some time.
So is that something that would be done? Or I guess it would be done in conjunction with the county, like, has there been any work about identifying potential sites or?
No.
No, okay.
No, I mean, no is the short answer. We have tried to coordinate with the county. Mostly we're begging for them to keep the money, the little bit of money that's collected here for Quimby funds to stay here. That's not, they've had their own kind of policy and we've observed it being spent elsewhere. But we have collected development impact fees for parkland, for park improvements in parkland, that are within our jurisdiction. It's just in the short term, since we've collected them, they've all been devoted to the Evers Park improvements.
Right.
Which while that's a big improvement, it isn't actually adding
Adding
parkland.
anything, right.
It's adding amenities to the park.
Enhancing.
To
what
existing,
already-
correct.
Okay, so then number 3 was all of these, work with the school district.
So we do have a joint use agreement, or more of a, yeah, we do have a joint use agreement, and it comes up for renewal every third year, I wanna say. Incremental increases to the cost of it, but we basically get sort of second right to use for, their facilities.
So that agreement in its current form and in its historic forms gives us access to, primarily with the way we use it is gym space. So our whole basketball
Okay.
program,
Yeah.
all the games are held in school facilities. This talks more about outdoor activities. We also use school sites for soccer, for example, and we're like dependent on access to the school sites to be able to accommodate our programs. We don't have enough space at our facilities alone. So school sites are used not only for games, but also for practices. Basketball too, but those are outdoor gym.
So do we have agreements that satisfy the need for the 4 new soccer fields?
We do not.
Or, no,
Just the existing space.
okay, so 3, no, we haven't accomplished number 3.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, so.
Is that
as
because we don't really have do we really need
Well, we,
in terms
so
of?
let's say in 2015, when this data was collected, we probably were not using the school sites for
We were
soccer.
not.
That kind of ebbed and flowed a few times. Now, because we've grown a bit over the last, say, 5 years, we really need them
Yes.
for soccer. We used the school site for flag football this year.
Not this year, but not this past summer season, but we will likely be this summer season.
So we're able to utilize those as if our facilities cannot accommodate our programs.
Right, okay,
The reason maybe we didn't back in 2015 is, one, it's just less convenient. Two, at the time, our facilities were deemed to be in being maintained in better condition than the school facilities, and we don't really have control of their maintenance programs. Since then, we haven't been able, I'm not sure that's the case any longer. And then secondly, our programs have grown to the point where we need that space regardless of its, of some of those other shortfalls. But for programs like soccer, it's typically, these spaces are available to us as long as we're not interfering with other school activities.
okay.
Yeah.
So number 3 is sort of as the need has arisen in terms of us needing overflow space, we've investigated and established agreements with the school district for whatever sport. field.
Yeah, the school agreement it basically says you can use our space as long as we're not using it.
Got it, okay.
So we have they're much more protective of some areas than others, but for all the programs that we've historically ran, we're able to make that work most of the time.
Okay. Okay, so that answers number 3, I think. 4, I think, is self-evident. I wanted to know about the safe routes for school, if that has been an initiative that we have worked with the school district on.
We have supported their efforts on that, right? In the form of information dissemination. I think the fire department has been involved actually, in some ways as well with just, when emergency services can't get through the street because, what was happening was people would just park on the street, in the right of way, right? And just sit there and wait for their kid, right? So.
And so primarily the safe routes to school is gonna be the responsibility
Of the
county
schools.
public
Right,
works.
okay.
Actually, because the county has control of the roads and sidewalks, they can collaborate with us. They're supposed to be collaborating with the schools to improve those walking conditions. We shared this information with the county when it was developed. We gave a presentation to county parks, when this was developed. I wouldn't say we've had ongoing collaboration with the schools or the county. It's not our jurisdiction.
Yeah, I mean, so this is really just in there as
These were things that came up
Yeah.
when
During the
there were
conversation.
surveys and people commenting. That's how this was reflected, because the district has zero jurisdiction over, say, public roads. So even if we said there's a sidewalk that's missing between the school and XYZ location, so let's take Vineyard Elementary School, there's clearly not a single sidewalk that can get you there. Sorry to sound judgmental. There is no sidewalk to that school at all. It'd be a great candidate for a sidewalks to school improvement or safe routes to school improvement. We don't have any jurisdiction of that public right of way. We could develop a park next to school and put a sidewalk in it,
Yeah.
but we couldn't construct a sidewalk on a public road.
okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know why that was included, and that makes sense.
Yeah, they were
Just like a-
fallout, yeah, so this ended up being a lot of the comments came in about trails and people wanting to walk outdoors. And so that's how these were folded. Some of those items were folded in various ways. Or the consultant kind of said, well, I think we can show that we meet this need in a variety of ways, one of which was there were already some established, I'll call them like sort of preferred walking routes. They're not an identified trail. They're just a rural location where where people walk, and those got incorporated into the plan.
Like Santa Rita Road, I think was one of them, right? Like it's also a road that people drive on, so. you gotta hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, all right, those are my questions for that. Oh, I do have a question. So the sort of like community outreach and the work that the consultant did for this, was that the last time that we have done a sort of a larger effort to either survey community folks about interest in either activities, events, recreation?
It was, yeah.
Okay.
So there was a Blue Ribbon Committee that was put together just before, well, it was put together years ago and then reinvigorated during this time to get all of that information. Some of the surveys, I mean, a lot of this was just, you know, paper surveys that were left at the market, right? And I think I know someone who filled them out 3 times, right? So it's not necessarily scientific data,
Yeah.
right? I think it is a reflection of what people are most passionate about though, right? And what people want. And in wherever that table is, and I'm sorry, I don't have it written down where it is, in the 100 and something pages we're looking at here. But it was, I think regardless of how many times you filled that paper out or, you know, the online survey, the outcomes would have stayed the same, frankly. It was, we want a gym, we want better, more grass space. You know, we're not too worried about equestrian trails, but if you could do it, that'd be cool, you know? I think it was, you know, the data that was received, although scientifically probably not super quantifiable, right? I think it was still very accurate for what the community is wanting. So, and there are things that we still hear today. It's also because we haven't done a great effort in doing surveys, between then and now, right? That was one of the things in the Park and Rec, element of our strategic planning
Mhm,
that
yeah.
was, that we were looking at doing, cause it's definitely something that we need to go back out and
Are you
make
talk-
sure it's what we want again.
Are you talking about the table on page 1-2?
Could be page 1-2.
Yeah.
Let's get up and find out, shall we? Oh, that's gonna be probably around here.
Oh, yeah.
That's
Actually, this is a good one for what we were talking about before too, as far as the
Yes.
build out goes, right?
So yeah, so like all the milestones that we need to have, like how many soccer fields, softball
Right.
fields.
There was another table too.
There
where
was,
it Listed all of the. I feel like it was towards the end
Towards the end of the.
of the document for all the maps.
pretty close to. There we go.
Uh-uh.
Bikeways, gosh darn, bikes and paths, man. It was, yeah, it was the Blue Ribbon Committee. Jeez. Sorry.
It's on comparison. Oh, there's the comparison.
Demographics.
Oh, the blueprint survey park and recreation expansion.
Yeah,
Okay, that's one on 6-4.
There's another.
Before that.
Well, it listed like activities.
Yeah, there's some,
we're just gonna go to this. I don't know. It was in here.
but yeah, I mean, it's just. We do need a lot more than what we have right now, so.
Yeah, cause I know, and we had talked about this a little bit during the strategic planning, that, some of the things, when they were doing sort of the survey of all of the, events and classes and things that were, in practice and being held, yeah, this is it, yeah. At the time of this report have sort of like fallen off, like the Zumba and things.
Yes.
And so I really would be interested to know, what the community interest is in those types of activities. And I don't know if like this is the proper time to talk about it. But yeah, I would be interested in seeing what the interest is around organizing some of those things. But I did want to ask also, is there's any programming, any formal use of Lens Place right now?
Not formal, more informal, so that's where our offices are,
Uh-huh.
right? And so basketball practices happen there during the winter in the
Okay.
backyard, right? When it's raining, the teams will often come inside, right? And just do, you know, I don't know, in soccer, we would call it small ball work, right? Like through like passing stuff, right? Or like run plays. And then
Preschool, we have
after school, we have a preschool in there.
preschools in there 3 days a week.
Oh, the
Three mornings-
preschool.
3 mornings a week.
And during after school, we have a lot of middle schoolers that swing by. So it's kind of been almost a bit of like a drop-in, but very not supervised kind of place where they can come in, the kids will come in and do their homework. Or during non-basketball season, they'll go outside and shoot hoops in the backyard. Yeah, so it's been used as a bit of a middle school, which is actually something that I've wanted to start for a while. Sort of a middle school drop-in program in a sense, but just an open building with adults in it. And I'm not gonna be responsible for them, but I'm also not gonna let them kill each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so then like the building, they're hanging out like, gotta go home by 5 or what?
Well, we work 9 to 6,
Okay,
cause
so-
when we work till 5, everybody came late anyway, cause recreation doesn't happen during office hours. So, we stay till 6 and they're usually gone by then.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
sometimes they
and-
just come in, it's hot, and they come in and they sit down and they get some water and they're like, okay, I can finish my walk now, so.
And they're not, that's only happens when we have staff in the building, so it's not.
Yeah, not on Mondays,
Not on
right.
Mondays, not on weekends, whatever. There are occasional, we call the building like available to rent. So like, let's say that you wanted to teach aerobics, but you don't have a place to do it. You can actually rent the main room, and we have an hourly rate and start a class. And if that's how Zumba was
Yeah.
before. And so we're not necessarily running the class. We might pass out information that it's available since it's in our facility. We're not taking registration, but we help convey that information. And then it's really up to the instructor to see, is this something that they enjoy, that's profitable? I would assume that it's a component of it. It's sort of a private enterprise taking place at this location.
And the reason that, we would just sort of like be passively supporting something like that, is that because of staff capacity? Is that just not within our like jurisdiction as?
No, it's absolutely within our jurisdiction. We can choose to focus on classes. I will give you sort of the step back 2 miles kind of picture and say, in recreation, in a full service recreation committee or community, you would have programs that are divided up between youth and adult, sports and activities.
Right.
So now you have like 4 components, and then in most of these communities, you have aquatics, whole separate program as well. We have historically focused on youth sports, and that's been like 75 or 80% of what we do. We do a few activities, like for example, concerts in the park. It's not a youth sport, but we do it.
Okay.
These other things have been made available, but it's not where we've put effort. So if we were focused on, let's say, adult activities, then we would hire instructors and promote programs and take registration and all those kinds of things. That's where the staff effort would go. But historically, that's just not what the district's done. And that's probably why some of these activities have kind of ebbed and flowed, come and gone. It really depends on who's out there. It's, even when we had folks doing Zumba, I don't think they really made any money at it.
Yeah, it was kind of a community.
5 people there,
Kept her
whatever.
active.
So kind of a hobby kind of thing. That building also gets used for things, other activities, like 4-H uses the building for meetings and trainings and those kinds of things. So there are other related activities, they're recreation related, but
Right.
not necessarily,
It just hasn't been the focus or the priority.
the district.
Okay.
Yeah,
not,
historic.
not for any reason other than just, it hasn't been the good.
Focus has been all around youth sports from the beginning.
I'm talking a lot to you on that.
No, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested, like, I know, like, the demographic that I personally feel like I represent in terms of like young moms, and, I know anecdotally, there would be interest in organizing some events and things to serve that population, but I would be interested in a more informed study to see whether or not that is the case. I know that, Atascadero and Paso and, even other smaller CSDs, they do smaller events, and, like I was looking up, some CSDs, they offer like babysitting training. And I know a ton of teenagers in my neighborhood who would jump at the chance to have some sort of training to say, to comfort parents, to be able to get a job watching kids or something like that. So I would, when we talk about the strategic planning and things like that, I would love if we could revisit at some point, getting a better handle on what the current interest and demand is outside of youth sports. And things that we could do to facilitate that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think community classes would be a lot of fun to be able to host, so.
I mean, these are, valid points.
Yeah, it's
Look
just-
at me, I've always, I always thought, adult activities, even for seniors,
Yeah.
serious, citizens, they have, they could have a space where they could come and do their puzzles or.
yeah, and
I
in
don't
this
know,
space,
so-
I mean,
But then the thing is, which is fine, just then we need to look at things different.
right, yeah,
Obviously, with the staff that we have, do it all, so something will have to change.
well, that's also what I wanted to ask too about, the report had talked a little bit about volunteers. I know that you had mentioned, Mel, that volunteers are heavily utilized for a lot, like all of the sport programs. And a lot of that is like run by, like, in terms of like
So
coaches and everything like that. Is there any other volunteer, output, places for volunteers to plug in aside from youth sports and aside from the TRF fundraising efforts?
It's a bit of, we don't have a well-developed like volunteer management system, right? Or coordinated system, right? We do have a lot of, frankly, high school students that come in to ask about
Oh,
volunteering. Cause they're trying to hit their CSF hours, right? And so we have, like a list of things that they will accomplish for us, right? And a lot of it is like organizing equipment, it is picking up trash at the skate park, it is helping out at the garden. Sometimes, in fall, it's doing some of the cleanup in the outside areas, right? The leaves and things like that. If we have someone who's got, say, court ordered requirements, right? We just sent someone with the park staff for 20 hours, I think, to go do some of that work, right? But what we don't have, like okay, we're gonna have, volunteer coordination meetings, right? And you're gonna go off and accomplish these tasks, right? So it's a little more loosey-goosey, I guess, than that, so. Because it's based on the timing of when historically the people wanted to do it, right? So, or there's like the community cleanup, right, which gets a lot of volunteers to come out, so.
Would that, and forgive me, because I don't quite still yet understand TRF and how it sort of like functions, would that be something that you would lean on for TRF to?
Sometimes, so like when I have big events that need a lot of volunteers, I will lean on TRF and they'll go either come themselves, right? Or bring folks with them, right? The beer run is a good example of that. It takes a lot of volunteers along the route to sort of coordinate, and they will bring a lot of folks with them. Or sort of, do some coordinating for outside volunteers to come. So yes, sometimes, that's not a far cry. I think ideally the rec foundation, while hosting events and things, they're really sort of a fundraising arm so that we have frankly, a registered nonprofit that can be donated to and will directly benefit the programs, right? So I think a lot of their efforts are spent towards that fundraising, fundraising efforts. So,
I mean,
I
I'm
think-
sure I have more.
Well.
Go on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think whether we should, like, the questions you're asking, where are you going? I wonder if we should maybe agendize another item.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just, I'm not quite sure with the master plan and you're talking specific programs and things like that, so it may be,
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
I
kind of,
I think the things that are in here, I think if it comes from the question of what's evolved since the master plan and how
Yeah.
we do things.
right.
We would offer Zumba tomorrow if there's somebody came in and said, we wanna teach Zumba, let me, or aerobics or whatever. Can I do it on Mondays and Thursdays at 6 o'clock? And Mel would look at the calendar and say, not Mondays, but Tuesdays and Thursdays are open and, okay, here's the
Yeah.
arrangement. And they, you know, and they would try and we would,
Right.
that we'd be in until they stop, you know?
I mean, I do share, but I do share your concerns.
Yeah,
So-
no.
And that's what I do wanna sit down and figure out, you know, what can we do, you know?
yeah, so
to
I'm
get
trying
the
to
whole
just, yeah,
community involved
understand a little
versus-
bit about
yeah,
how.
yeah.
Because the report also did talk a little bit about like marketing and how, you know, we can better advertise and reach the community, and so in the instance of, you know, someone wanting to offer Zumba, I'm just wondering like what have we been able to dedicate any efforts to sort of going out and soliciting community, you know, testing the waters. We have this space available. Is anybody interested in yada, yada, yada?
Yeah, so we've talked to like, you know, some of the folks that do community classes in Paso or in Atascadero.
Yeah,
There's been some interest, although honestly, a lot of the instructors don't like our model, right? They don't like the idea of paying rent. And all the success and failure of the class is on them, right? We don't have a developed community classes guide. We don't have a rec guide, right? So marketing is typically direct, right, to the people I have access to, right, which is mostly families, right, and schools. And so, and then, you know, when you go to the city of Paso as an example, it has a lot of really great community classes, and they vet the instructors. They kind of, they'll fingerprint them and they'll, make sure their class is something that their community would be interested in taking. And then they kind of take the risk together, right? For the success or failure of the class, right? And our model is all on the instructor for success and failure. And I think that feels less supportive to a lot of community class instructors who are accustomed to a specific style, right? So I think if we were able to adjust, I think we could probably find some more success. And again, it would, staff efforts would have to go there, right? And so things will shift a little bit. But
We do
yeah,
some
I think
programs where there's some of this shit, like I think skate and scoot camp, for
Yeah.
example.
yeah.
It really comes down to when can we be there? So I've worked in communities where there were classes were supported and promoted by the city. But they're staffed, and so the instructor might be outside, but there's a building that has a staff member that can turn on the air conditioner and
Part-time work.
deal with the lights, and we don't have any of that. So like if you were to teach Zumba at 6:30 on a Tuesday, you would be given a key and an alarm code, and it's up to
Yeah,
you.
I'll show you how to work
Yeah.
the.
That's it. There's no staff at the building. So we're not running it like a recreation center. A city would typically, if you're gonna host these kind of classes, you'd have
Yeah.
the support system in
Right.
place where you'd have staff members who can handle.
It's like a facility rental.
Yeah,
with it.
that's right.
Right.
You'd have people there who could, like, if you had if you're a Zumba instructor and you are teaching Zumba and the toilet overflows, there's not a staff member there to help deal with that. We would, in order to do this properly, you'd have to really staff the facility
Yes,
so
yes.
that you're dealing with lights and security and all these things. And that's probably part of the reason why this really didn't work out well. The last time the district ran other than preschool, ran a program that really took advantage of Len's Place was when we did the after-school
Yes.
program.
Mhm.
The teen center
Yeah.
program, and that's been, more than 15 years.
Yeah.
And that was staffed, Templeton CSD staff members worked the program. It was district funded effort with enrollment, but it lost a lot of money. And so, 15+ years ago, it ended. Because those programs typically don't cover their costs.
Right. Okay, interesting.
So now the facility is more or less, if no one's in there, it's a drop-in center, but it's very informal, because you couldn't as a parent bank on that. Like,
Right, yeah,
I couldn't, if I had an 11-year-old, I couldn't, and I said, well, you gotta go go to the rec center every day after school. Well, okay, well, that's not gonna work on Mondays ever, for the most part. And then anytime we didn't have anybody else in the room, like, let's say there was a meeting gonna be in there, or let's say there was 4-H gonna have a program at 4, well, you gotta go somewhere else, cause I have somebody using the room. It's not like we don't block out that time, it's just happens to be available most of the time.
and so the efforts that you've made to sort of try and make contact with other community leaders or instructors, not so fruitful. Do you maintain the Parks and Rec website? Like, who has access over the information that's actually on the website? You do.
Yeah.
And
I attempt to maintain.
okay,
We used to produce the guide that Bill referred to. So actually, many years ago, the district put out our own publication. Then we were having difficulty finding a publisher. We combined our efforts with the Chamber of Commerce and
Mhm.
published a twice-a-year publication. And back when if we had a class that was offered, then it would have shown up in that publication. Well, like in 2019, the chamber lost the publishing arrangement. Those things are reliant on like advertisers to pay
Yeah.
for it. And it wasn't became unreliable. And then, of course, the chamber folded during COVID, and so it doesn't even exist anymore, So we don't have a regular publication that would, like, if you thought, okay, for the folks that you're thinking of, maybe something showed up in the mail, they could thumb through it to see what programs exist. There isn't anything coming in the mail. We could do things through like let's say somebody wanted to run a Zumba class and they went to mail and said, well, what are my options for getting this information out there? Well, one of the options would be to have through our utility bill to advertise it. And we would accept that,
yeah.
but we would bill the party that wished to do it as long as the information in it was.
What about advertising on the Rec and Park website?
We
So
would.
when we had Zumba class, I had that on there.
Is
Absolutely.
so I looked and I may have just missed it, but like, it's like the preschool information, is that on the website?
I don't put that on there.
Why?
She actually asked me not to.
Okay.
Actually, it was the previous instructor. That brings up a valid point. We have a new one, and she might like that I do that actually.
Oh, so it was
yeah.
just like the preference of,
Of the instructor, yeah.
because
yeah.
like normally any other like public accessible
Yes,
sort of program
yes.
would be on.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
Um,
And it was because she was always full, and so she was like, please don't advertise, because it just means I
I
have
had to
to
turn
everybody
people
else."
away.
Right, but now we have a new instructor, and I think it's a very different than it was previously, right? So I think, that would be, that could be helpful, I didn't even think of it.
And then the garden was mentioned in the report, we've talked a little bit, is there any formal programming happening at the garden?
Yes, sort of. So we have a giving garden out there. A woman named Gretchen kind of runs, she takes like the whole back corner of it basically and grows food to give to people, right? So anybody who is food poor can during harvest times come and get food, right? So she's looking at building a farm stand. That's actually part of update that I'm giving later. Building a bit of a farm stand out there where people can come just pick it up, right? Historically, when it's ready, she'll bring it into the rec department, we take pictures, we post it, and we, first come, first serve, when it's gone, right? And people come and get it, and they're very excited about it. And then
Is
we,
that on the website?
yes, yeah, the garden should be on the website, yes. I should double check that. Thanks for the notes.
I'm sorry, guys.
Don't be
just
sorry, I like
it.
No, and the garden, I'll say is underutilized, you know, I think each season sort of changes, it's a rental system, right? We charge, if you wanted to grow a garden, let's say you lived in a place, you lived on a location you couldn't grow fruits and vegetables, like you lived in an apartment, whatever. You can come rent, it's $30, what's the,
$20.
$20 for the season. And you have now a devoted location, although it's not particularly secure, you just have sort of reserved it.
And you're in charge of maintaining your
You,
own.
yes, everything. We do nothing. We ensure there's water. Hopefully we clean up any major problems out there, but it's up to you to water, to pick, to do whatever. It's not anything that the district staff assists with.
How large of a piece of land for $20?
Sorry,
How large
for
is
the year,
plot?
it's $20 for the year, resets in March.
But the plot, how large is it?
Oh, for the size.
It's, you get 2 boxes, 4 by 8,
Okay.
so 8 by 16, I guess, if you put them near each other.
Are they
Yeah, like
all-
raised boxes, so.
Are they all like, are you at capacity in terms of like renting them out to community members?
For the boxes that we have, yes, but we're getting more soon. So. Yeah, so no, kind of.
And there's plenty of space up there to
But
add.
there's a lot of space, yeah, the plots aren't, well, the plots that are not in, like with boxes, right? Are not easily identifiable, they haven't been sort of maintained with space between, for walking between, you know. But we could easily rent them out, so, it's just they don't do very well, cause we have a lot of gophers and squirrels, and so they do better when they're in a raised bed situation.
Do you use volunteers, like the high school students, to help out
Yes.
with it?
And the Knucklehead Skate Park kids that are out there. They look scary looking. They look like they're up to no good, and they might be, but I know what they're growing, so.
So this is, I swear, my last big question. We talked a little bit about, you know, the structure that we have that's almost more like a facility rental for some of those classes and things. What about, what is the, I don't know how to phrase this. What is the status of programming at, for instance, like, German Park?
For like rentals or?
No, in terms of, so
Internal.
like, yeah, so like, in order to host a class or something at one of our actual physical.
Yeah,
The speed bump or the, obstacle to getting more, community interest in leading some of those things, right, is our structure in terms of the rentals and also staff needing to be present to worry about, maintaining whatever
Correct.
issues may come up. What are the obstacles to programming at German?
2 parts. One, the sports field is closed when we are not using it for the most part, other than rentals. And during certain times of year, it's closed entirely for rest so that it can, grow grass, right? Cause I need grass during soccer season, right? So there's
Our program takes place there, so our soccer program
Yeah.
Right.
relies on it and as has,
Outside of youth sports.
Yeah. So if we look at like the upper section, right, is typically what we would look at as like, renting out, right? And we have, for
Parties and
Birthday
things,
parties,
yeah.
yeah.
birthday parties, we've rented it out for some community classes for, oh gosh, there was like a pre-K thing that was out there about learning in the outdoors, right? It's hippie stuff, great,
Yeah.
it was beautiful.
Uh-huh.
There's been, in the past, there's been like a Kids Love Soccer program that was out there, right? Sort of a mommy and me style or a parent and me. And then, there's been a few other, like a dog training class was out there once. So there's been some, rentals and they're it's the same structure, right? If you want to rent, it's a rental, right? And we'll guarantee your space. We have a little thing that says it's reserved, right? And if you want me to advertise it, I will, right? But you have to give me the flyer and make it easy for me to do that. I'm not developing this for you. And then they can come out and do that. Historically, though, Bethel is more popular for use on the weekends for birthday parties, right?
But some of the issues that we talked about would be mitigated because it's an outdoor park, right? So like nobody's gonna have to unlock, well, I mean, the gate.
Yeah, but the
Already
gate's open at a
unlocked.
time when it would
The
be.
daytime
open.
use
It's
only.
open dawn to dusk kind of idea.
So would that be an easier avenue to sort of focus on getting programmed? Because staff necessarily might not have to be physically present, or would you still have to be physically present?
You know, we wouldn't need to be there. Those, I mean, it's a little more indestructible. It's,
Like classes.
Right.
I mean, I just think, you know, yes, I think the parks, I'll call it a reservation. It's just a matter of sort of perspective. We're not actually closing the park to everybody else. We're just saying you have this picnic spot
Okay.
reserved.
Yeah.
Everyone else is still around. Absolutely. And so like say at Everest Park, we host a number of events there that are held there that are not our programs, but are, that use the park, like Challenger Soccer. So they, that is held at Everest Park. It could be held at Sherman Park, but it's held at Everest Park because it's a bigger space. But yeah, those programs could take place at the parks if there was, you know, if there's not much in the way, and there's not much of a barrier.
Yeah,
Those are,
yeah,
those are open all the
things like that.
time. We already have a system to open them up every morning and close them every night. Less concerns about like how the facility works. I just think you're, it's, you know, you're weather dependent.
Mhm.
And so rain cancels or whatever, you know, it probably works great for things like dog training, doesn't work so well for like painting or whatever the other,
Yeah.
whatever the class would be.
Okay.
So yeah, but the park spaces could be used in that fashion. And have been, but not a ton.
We had a fitness class out there too, in mornings several years ago. So,
In my dream world, I would love if that could be a future focus is, you know, potentially focusing on trying to either drum up interest and supporting the activation of that space, because it does seem like maybe there's less barriers for residents, community members to organize themselves than it would be for them to utilize one of our actual buildings.
I will say that some of this activity may take place sort of even without our involvement. For example, here at Templeton Park, there are groups of young moms actually who come and exercise
Oh, yeah.
frequently.
Yeah.
They don't rent the space,
Yeah.
they just show up here and use and go,
Yeah.
right? Like, there's no formal, and we wouldn't know because it's not our space, but, and that maybe, that could happen, and it actually does happen at Everest Park, it's like CAL FIRE does
CAL FIRE comes,
tons of,
yeah.
they come and have a huge impact on the park without any reservation. But, so the parks can be used, and we may or may not know about it, right?
Yeah.
Like in that
There's a
fashion.
dog training class.
Oh, yeah, over
at
here.
the farmer's market every
Yeah.
Saturday.
yeah, Kathy Crop, yeah, she rents it, yeah.
But I just think that like if there was a little bit more formal organization, we could reach potentially even more people, and I think utilizing Rec and Park and the network that you already have through all of the youth sports, you know, could increase participation.
Totally.
Because we don't have, you know, more traditional sort of press or media. What we are dependent upon is, you know,
So,
the CSD website and the network that, you know, you already have built in terms of all of your volunteers who are here helping out with all of the recreational sports.
and the purpose would be to make this a more full scope of, you know, for all residents,
Yeah,
not just concentrated
yeah,
to youth.
yeah. Because I know that, you know, a lot of folks are going to other parts of the county for that sort of engagement, and it'd be really great if you could offer, you know, something similar. Okay, yeah.
Not very informative though.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very comprehensive
It's a-
document.
Yeah, it's a really good master
Yeah.
plan. I just hope that we could. Yeah. Put in place all the stuff that, you know, that so we need. And, impact fee collection analysis. So this kind of, I guess, goes back to what was in the master plan, kind of what was taken out, and I guess you wanna let us know
Yeah,
about what's been happening and since we
so.
implemented, impact fees.
So impact fees, after the master plan was updated, in 2018, the district did a comprehensive impact fee analysis for all of its areas, service areas. And for Parks and Recreation, the impact fees were recommended to be adjusted. When that analysis first began, it was recommended that the impact fees for, and I'll use just an example. It was initially recommended that in order to build what the master plan suggested was necessary as we grew, that an impact fee for park improvements would need to be about $11,700 per residential unit. Over the course, that was what was like initially calculated. Over the course, based on the costs that were outlined in the master plan, there were some assumptions made in the master plan about how much parkland would cost, et cetera, et cetera. Over 3 meetings, really 3 reviews by the board had several workshops, that figure was pushed down, not because of savings that we could see, but really pressure from the development community and sticker shock about how much it was before that, how much it would be going up to. And so by the time the fees were actually adopted for Parks and Recreation in November, that fee was set at $5,437. So it was set at roughly 46% of what it was originally calculated. So right away, we need to acknowledge that our impact fees were gonna collect something less than half of what the master plan suggested the cost would be. And I would argue that those costs, even though we've adjusted these fees since then, so the fees are no longer $5,400, they've been adjusted by what's called the construction cost index, so they've been indexed since. So they've gone up. But the costs have certainly gone up. And I would argue faster than the construction cost index, because that doesn't take into consideration the cost of the land itself. Because we don't own a park site, a future park site as of today. So that's where we were back in 2018. That fee took effect at $5,437. And of course, there were fees for ADUs, there were fees for commercial and industrial, institutional type land as well, but they're all kind of the same ratio of reduction was applied. So that took effect January 19th, 2019. Since then, so in the past 6 years, we have collected $325,900.
You say it again?
$325,900. We have a current balance, estimated balance at January 31st this year of $1,134,000. So we had some money in the account previously. We've been collecting money. We've spent some money, particularly on the design of Everest Park. Current balance of just over $1 million. Since the impact fees were adjusted, we've collected $325,900
But since 2019.
since January 19th, 2019.
So
That's the date of the imposition.
it should have been,
If we had imposed what was originally calculated, and if that had zero impact on who actually built, because again, these are only paid when somebody, builds a home, a business, whatever, we would have collected $703,589. So about $375,000 less than we did collect because of that reduction. Now, again, that's making some assumptions there, right? That means that reduction didn't create any other development that wouldn't have already come anyways, and we just don't know that. We wouldn't know.
people are gonna say, oh, look at the, low impact fees, let's go build.
So we don't really know, so.
They're gonna build and they pay its fees.
So it was requested that we just kind of report on that, because a lot of what we'll talk about here over the next couple of items is really like the district had right off the bat wanted some vast improvements, particularly at Everest Park. And we could talk about German Park, all this on the agenda, we should some other time. There's some real needs there too, to make the park work better for the community. And in order for the parks to utilize impact fees, they really need to be focused on adding amenities or adding facilities to serve a growing population, not necessarily just replacing a piece of equipment or replacing a facility or maintaining a facility. Generally, you won't be able to use impact fees for those kinds of activities. So there's on the Parks and Rec side, we have challenges both with adding facilities, because a limited amount of money available, and a similar challenge with maintaining facilities. If we have more to maintain, it costs more to maintain. So unique challenges on both fronts, but we've got about just over $1 million, and we've collected $325,900.
That $1 million is just going to just only cover the first phase of Everest Park.
Hopefully, it will cover that.
I mean, and then this is for a master plan and that we see all the items that's on there, plus all the other, so it's just, it's not enough, so. And I mean, my thought is we do need to revisit the impact fees and justify it being so low. I mean, to me, it's just is way too low. So we do need to revisit it, if, look at the master plan, see what we want to keep from the master plan and kind of take into account that the land cost has gone up so much. And I think even though we've increased it by the construction CPI index, I think the costs have just gone up way more. So that's something that I think it needs to be analyzed.
Are we restricted by any, are we allowed to revisit the impact fee anytime we want, or are we restricted by time frame?
So you're not particularly restricted. You can set the fees. They're governed by the section of the government code, but they're for you to set, provided you meet the Mitigation Fee Act requirements. There have been some changes to the Mitigation Fee Act over the years. And I wanna, if we're gonna consider making some adjustments to the fees, I wanna go back and review a couple of more recent laws. I wanna say that maybe last year, a new bill took effect or became law that states that if an impact fee is set newly, a new impact fee set, it has to rely on a master plan that is 8 years old or newer.
Oh, okay.
So,
We might have to,
and I think if you're gonna redo all these calculations, you probably have to update the master plan just to deal, even if you don't change any of the goals, just to bring the costs current. Because it's
Matter of updating.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be the whole.
Oh, yeah, we wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel on that.
Yeah.
So the better information you work for, the more defensible the fees that you would set, right? Like, so I think you would need to update the master plan in order to adopt new development impact fees. But I would like to research that 8-year requirement just to make sure it does apply. A lot of times there's laws that come in effect that we may or may not, they may not apply to us because we're a special district and not a planning agency. We don't provide the entitlements. So I want to confirm that.
No, yeah, you're good.
Do you agree that we should at least revisit?
yeah, I mean, I definitely wanna know, what would be required for us to,
I can confirm the rules about the
Yeah.
impact fees.
and then, yeah, I would like to.
Yeah, I think then, I don't recall if we had actually, we had in the draft materials, and maybe we could touch on this when we come back to the strategic planning is review the master plan. If an update is ultimately, we need to fold that in and then program that, budget for that, and then work with somebody to adjust this. I would tend to agree that not a ton has changed in Templeton in 9 years as far as Parks and Recreation. We don't have a ton of new facilities. We don't have very much growth. You may want to freshen up what people's demands are, but as far as the facility recognition and whatnot, those haven't changed much. Yeah.
Our assets and things are.
How do our fees compare with like Templeton and Paso and,
Yeah, that's something that's typically analyzed at the time the impact fees were set, and it would have been part of that impact fee study at the time.
No, I think because once we lowered the fee, we were like one of the lowest.
Okay.
Because we lower, I mean, as you
Is
said,
it-
we
is
lowered
it-
it from
yeah.
11,700 to
Because we
5,000.
raise it too high, then people are gonna say, well, just build it outside.
You'll get pushback. I mean, we
Oh,
had
yeah,
a room full of people,
Oh,
we had a room full of people pushing back on the fees, and that was one of the reasons why I think it was set lower than what was originally recommended.
I mean, we can always argue we lowered it years ago. I don't like development has taken off, so it doesn't seem like it was that big of a.
My hope is as we're selling more water units, maybe.
Yeah.
that would- Okay. Alright, so that's, so you'll just, so you
Yeah,
have.
I'll
enough
review
direction on
the
that
thing,
item.
and then I think we can touch on this as we kind of fine tune those strategic plans. I think if updating the master plan ends up being something that the committee wishes, that should get folded in there so that we can budget for it, allocate time for
Yeah,
it.
it could be like a 3-year.
Yeah,
Okay. Review of, wow, is this item ever gonna come off the agenda? Please.
So there's actually two parts here. The
Yeah,
first,
the
I
5 is different than 6.
there's some confusion, I think. I wanted, so, I put this on in this review of the Brightview plan because there was actually a method to this madness. Nobody will get it but me, but, so we had the master plan, right? That was the first in order. Then we did the impact fee study. It was recognized during the master plan that the highest priority thing was to like improve Everest Park because it's like a blank slate out there. There's a pretty large piece of land. We have a number of programs up there, but there's some obvious things that were missing from Everest Park that prevented it from serving the community in a broader way. So following a couple years later, we hired a company called Brightview, and you can click on that. We did to do a Everest Park improvement plan, not to design the improvements, but just to take it from like a 30,000-foot view. What are we missing at Everest Park? What should we be having? How can we plan to make improvements? Knowing that it's gonna take a long time to get all these things that we had in mind. And so we hired Brightview, and Mel can outline some of what was in the plan. The reason I want to do this first is because after we did Brightview work, we went on and hired MIG to design some of the components that are in the plan.
I think a lot of this is going to look familiar because a lot of what we discuss as the park improvement plan that will never come off this agenda. A lot of it is discussed, or excuse me, the park improvement plan is basically phase 1, right? Of what was identified through this design plan, right? But this is the design plan, not the actual scope of work, right? So if we're looking at this, we've got the play area that we're talking about building in the current MIG plan. We've got the walking path, which will stop here, right? This is that sort of more stormwater, it's a detention basin really. So the walking path coming around here, and then some improvements to the entry to hit more of those ADA standards. So this purple, I think, was extra gathering space, extra parking spaces, but it's not really gonna prove to be enough to amend what's happening in the park. So let's go for clickable links, come on. No, dang it. Okay, so we'll go down to basically, because I'm not gonna show you all of it, because it's just gonna make you sad about what we're not doing. Let's look at what we are doing. There pays a probable cost of this one. The prioritization part of this. So all of the areas that were identified for ways to improve the park that would, increase community use and health and safety, and they're all weighed with the costs and constructability. And it was all given basically a ranking for the prioritization. So if we look on the side, it's
Including some community input about, we took
Yes.
this was available to the public, we took comments, and we asked them what did they think was most important, and all those things got folded into this matrix.
yes, so the top priorities are kind of listed in green here. The arrival walk, which is the sort of widening of the entrance to the parking lot and a safe way to get into that park. The sloped walk is really the ADA ramp. The perimeter walk was given a high priority, as well as lighting up currently the sports field lighting doesn't hit the back end of the far fields, we call field two, right? So field two is not well lit in the winter time and it impacts soccer all-stars, right? So there is lighting on the softball section of the field, but the deeper you go into the outfield, the darker and more shadowed it gets. So that was also a high priority. That was also a high cost. So, not happening. So when we looked at the prioritization, what the community said they wanted, we looked at what we can reasonably build. We decided on the exploration playground in general, because frankly, it's strange to have a park without a playground, even if it is a sports park. The arrival walk and the slopes walk are necessary components. Aside from being hugely important to the community, they impact ADA access. And anytime you're going to do any improvements to public space, the first thing that has to happen is coming up to code with the ADA standards. So, and then the perimeter walk.
Question for you, Mel. The column for cost, the number identified, is it the lower the number, the lower the cost? What is that?
Yeah, so 10 points is the low cost.
So
Right.
10 would be considered low?
Correct.
10 points would be more favorable, like a gate.
Favorable and the
Total-
cost ratio, yeah.
It's not worth like a value
Okay.
type of.
So the playground was considered high cost? Cause it was a 2?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, yes, good clarification there. A field plaza, which is super cheap, it's like laying down some
Yeah,
concrete, right? It was given a 10, cause that'll be super easy.
but the lights you said we were not pursuing because they were too costly?
Yeah, 4 is a relatively costly, it's kind of a medium, see the little structure up here?
Huh?
It's kind of hard to see, I think, it's hard for me at least. But 4 points is kind of a medium to high cost, right? So, and if you look at the, on that, I think constructability was also kind of medium to high,
Okay, got it.
issue.
It got,
We have
actually,
to-
it scored, what ended up happening is, so we took these scores and then we came back after this, after this was done and kind of reprioritized internally and moved forward with just certain components. And I think the idea of the sports lighting was, we felt it had minimal, there were benefits to it, it was needed, but it didn't serve as many people as some of the
It's
other
not gonna serve
improvements,
as
and that's
much
why
as-
it was not folded into the Evers Park improvement.
Yes, I can envision hundreds of kids playing on a
Yeah.
playground and like dozens of kids benefiting
Yeah.
from extra lighting, right?
Plus, for
Um,
the playground, we got donation as well.
Yes, we could get some
Yeah.
donations from
Yeah.
that, or we've received some, correct. And so on top of that, the sports field lighting, I mean, that's conduit, that's turf repair and replacement, right? That's additional cost with lighting, right, in general, just electrical costs. So it was internally deemed a little less high priority than maybe the community who thinks it's just put up a light, right? Put up a light, piece of cake. right?
We also did another lighting project since then, we converted the old lights to LEDs and we were able to make some just very minor changes to hopefully improve the
Yes.
area that we had.
Yes.
So we kind of moves the location of some of the lights to light up a little bit more field space, but it is not lit to a playable
Any
standard.
playable, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I was understanding.
Sure. So that is basically what we ended up, sort of prioritizing. So these are gonna be very familiar to you as we sort of work through the next part with the park improvement plan, which we've all become a bit more familiar with, so.
I think all this is to say that, right, you came with this really great idea of improving the park. And we decided to proceed with like a third of the improvements.
Correct.
Because of budget limitations. If we had $5 million at the time, maybe all of them would have been folded into the plan. But just a few were.
But all of the recommendations that Brightview proposed, we see the benefit of, we're just not pursuing right now for funding reasons.
Correct. And
Oh, yeah, this was something that we worked with them along the way, right?
And nothing that we're pursuing with the Evers plan will affect the future pursuit of the other things that Brightview proposed.
correct, I would see these as more of a phase 2 project, which will frankly likely be field and turf replacement. And
So-
that, I mean, if you look at, sorry, I'm sorry, Jeff. If you look at the, like, the costs and, you know, on this line here, right, all of that, it was deemed a low priority at the time. We had some different circumstances. But I think if we asked now, that would be the highest priority of the community.
Which one?
Is the field and turf
Okay.
replacement and repair, frankly.
It's
But
also
the
not,
costs and the,
yeah, it's not, we couldn't use development impact fees to pay for it,
exactly,
so.
Because it's considered an improvement, not.
Well, it's not, it's just a replacement.
because it's a
It's
replacement.
it's like, it's not adding capacity. Right now, we have 0 playgrounds, so we add a playground, we're adding capacity.
Capacity.
A question on that, I mean. Is there semantic room to argue something like that?
Yes,
Yes,
it's not a cut and dry no.
Right,
and I'll get there.
because like,
I like
it
words.
could be increasing capacity.
I mean,
Well,
so
the-
somebody could argue, so somebody, I
The use of the
think.
park
you
has
could-
increased tremendously with the increase in
It has.
population.
You could, I think somebody could argue that if you went to like a turf, like not a natural grass, but a
Yeah.
turf, then you could have double the amount of gains
Right,
because you have all this.
Yes.
Wear to,
Okay.
that would be one way of arguing it, but we wanna be careful,
Yeah.
the mitigation fee act, I mean, the fees, impact fees are not to be used for maintenance. Not to be used for replacement.
Also, they're not like finite, we don't have a ton.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
That's the other
Already
part.
used that.
Yeah, I just wanted to know like how stringent, got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is semantic room. If-
Arguments can be made. We made the argument for the exploration playground, right, for a playground. It's adding an amenity, it's adding a capacity for use, it's, same thing with the arrival walk, right?
Or the entire walkway
The
around the
perimeter
park, it
walk.
doesn't exist right now,
Right.
so we're adding to the usability of the
Mhm.
park. You know, new
Brand new.
customers new residents can use the facility. The other improvements ended up. So we're gonna break, we can go on to the Everest Park thing, so.
No, I'm just,
So, you any questions on that?
okay, well, let's go to, so now we're gonna do Everest Park update, so we're gonna.
Yeah,
now
just,
talk about the
this will
stuff that.
be quick. So what ended up coming out of Brightview, because I know we're getting constrained for time. Out of Brightview, those four or five, I'll just say 4 components moved forward. We hired, we did we issued a request for proposals. And we had 3 or 4 design firms submit. The district hired MIG to design those first 4 improvements. Those improvements were originally, what was asked for was the improved AD access from the parking lot to the field level, because the parking lot's elevated. The perimeter walkway around the park, and originally it's thought that there could be some various options and maybe a crossover, and the playground. Once we designed those initially, we had originally put in a sidewalk from, there's right now no pedestrian access into the park, right? You share the space with the road, so that was also in there. But the sidewalk was not designed to be ADA compliant, it was just an improvement to make it safer to walk. Once we submitted that, the county came back and said, no, if you're gonna make any improvements to the park, even if you don't wanna do all these other things, if you're gonna just put a playground in, you have to make the park ADA compliant from the public right of way. So in order to put an ADA compliant sidewalk in, we had to change a lot of the grades. And then we had to put a railing around it. And so that caused us to have to widen the road. So these improvements up in the parking lot have all of a sudden become like half of the project, cost-wise. So it swelled considerably. So it started, consuming the budget. So the current design includes an ADA compliant sidewalk from Gibson Street to the top of to the parking lot area, or what's existing grade, the sidewalk in the parking lot. A new ADA handicap stalls, those will be reconfigured. Storm drains, because we're touching the parking lot, we've got to now meet storm drain requirements. So filtration for storm drainage. An ADA compliant pathway from the parking lot to the field level. We have an existing ADA pathway, but it's no longer currently compliant. It's asphalt, it's got bumps in it, doesn't meet the current code. Then a walkway from that landing spot, bottom of the ADA pathway, to the location of the playground, and about half of the original playground. Then there are a few options for this pathway around the park, from the playground circling back all the way around the park back to the restroom building. The base option is planned to be like a DG pathway with an ad alternative of making that concrete. So that has all been, we've been back and forth with the county now 3 times. And the county's had a lot of comments. So we've actually since the summertime, we've corrected those items. We've had to add all this issues with like the storm drain treatment and that kind of thing to comply. That was resubmitted to the county in February, and the county's system shows it pending review. So we've not received any review of our resubmittal of the plans. We did get an extension, the county granted an extension of the payment of the permit fees. And it's in for resubmittal. If the plans are turned around rapidly, then we can regroup with MIG, and we have to develop bid specifications and go out to bid. Because of the intense use of the park, we have a lot of programs at the park. We can't just build when it's convenient for us, because we'd end up losing programs. So we've identified short windows when construction can take place, like between November and February, which also happens to be a bad time in general to do outdoor construction. Or we've identified a period from May through August, early August, where we believe we could relocate the flag football program and do construction then. So probably our best bet scenario was the most construction would take place in the summer of 2026. Spring and summer of 2026.
Any questions on? No. Okay. All right. Review of 21 parks, recreation, solid waste fund analysis.
Sorry, this is fun. I
Yeah,
like driving.
Thank you. So this item's on the agenda because at the strategic planning workshop, which hasn't yet been adopted, but which sort of want to give it a running start, there were some inquiries about performing some analysis that would help the board and the community understand how dollars are spent within the Parks and Recreation programs. So let me tell you what we did back in 2021. The goal of this, what I want to get out of the committee today is this the type of analysis, the level of analysis that you think is necessary in order to inform you going forward? So back shortly in 2021, it was actually before then, but for several years prior to 2021, the Parks and Recreation Fund had a deficit. So in other words, it was spending more money than it was bringing in, and it was consuming slowly its fund balance, its savings account, so to speak. It wasn't a crisis, but you couldn't continue to go down that path indefinitely. In the years leading up to 2021, the district researched ways to sort of resolve this. And it was determined that the best approach would be to merge the solid waste fund, which had a surplus each year, with the Parks and Recreation Fund, and then that together they would do better. And we did some legal analysis and ultimately decided to proceed. So this was the first year, this year under that we're looking at here, looked at how this would function as a merged activity. And so if you could blow that up so I can read it a little bit better. So what we did is we took the 2021-22 budget was the first year that had this merged fund. These were the revenue sources: historic solid waste revenues and historic Parks and Recreation revenues. And then we assigned where those revenues likely came from. Were they solid waste? Well, for franchise fees, that's really simple, right? It comes from the solid waste activities, so we assigned it under that component. Were they Parks and Recreation, Parks and Facilities component? So we assigned some interest to that. We assigned some facility rentals to that. And then on the recreation component, we assigned all of the enrollment fees. So when kids enroll for soccer, they pay for those. Those were pretty easy to pick up. We kind of left the property taxes out of there initially and came back and populated that because it's very discretionary. It's really the only revenue source that the board has that is truly discretionary or tax proceeds. And then we took all the costs and basically broke it up the same way. We made some assumptions internally at the staff level about how we broke up wages between those various functions. And then we took all of the other line items on the expense side, just scroll down, you can see that these are all the same line items. Oh, you're gonna give it to me. In the budget, and we broke them down. Some cases they were simple and straightforward, other cases you had to make various assumptions. These are all the same line items that are in our budget, and came up with a total for the combined fund, for the solid waste component, for the facilities component, and for the recreation component. So when you add these three up, it should have equaled that. That's what we did. Then we came back and said, okay, some of these components without taxes have deficits, and so we populated the tax revenue under the revenue column until we reached a point where the funds were essentially zero. At least we reached a point where the parks and facilities were sort of zeroed out. And so under this analysis, and this was a budget level analysis based on the budget of the 21-22 fiscal year, not actuals. The overall fund produced a $40,000 surplus when they were combined. Of that surplus, $62,000 of it was on the solid waste side, if you will. The parks and facilities, the side was zeroed, and the recreation side had used up essentially $23,000 of the surplus, essentially of the solid waste. So this is what we did then. And I guess my question is,
The 23, that was in addition to the 73,000 for property taxes, looks like.
yes. So what we did at the time is we kept pushing property tax dollars to parks until it cleared out, until it zeroed out, essentially,
So
right?
you had 73,000 left.
Yes.
Put that on that, and you still were $23,000 short, then you got it from solid waste.
Yeah, well, but by then the merger had already existed, right?
Okay,
So,
yeah,
so yes.
yeah.
But this is just a way of looking at this, and again, there were a number of assumptions that have to be made. We'd have to do this again. And so after that came up a month ago, whatever that was, 5 weeks ago, I passed this out, I got a little feedback, and one of the board members said something like, well, it would be beneficial if it was based on, actuals as opposed to the budget figures, so maybe end of the year, that kind of thing. I'm bringing it to you, there's no new information. This is 4 years old, or almost 4 years old. Nothing's changed on this analysis. It's really coming to you to determine, because the expectation was this committee would work on this analysis. Is this the level and type of analysis that you think would satisfy that inquiry that came up 5 weeks ago?
Yes, I think this is amazing.
Would you guys do anything different? I wish we kind of had a trend. I would kind of like to see this almost done every year, like we do with water buffer policy, because then you could start to see a trend, but would you do anything different?
I think there's some validity in using actuals as opposed to budget figures. So if we did this like after July 1st, we would have close the books.
Okay.
We have to make, here's where the assumptions lie, and I think that you can kind of attack this, is you have to take the individual staff members and assign where they go. Now, for some folks, this is pretty simple, like we have a parks maintenance staff member or staff members. Yeah, they're really, the bulk of the work is park maintenance. Some of their work would be like field lining. Well, that's for a program, right? So we have to assign those costs. X amount of, how much of the time is directly in support of just the programs that we would not do if we weren't running the program. So for example, we wouldn't line soccer fields if we weren't running soccer.
Right,
But now we have.
and
a
other
robot.
facilities as well, right? Cause
Yeah.
they'll spend time out here doing beautification projects, right? That they can do, wouldn't be assigned to like parks.
It
now.
would, or it
Sorry,
wouldn't
I
be.
did not mean to talk.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm gonna speak over you.
So, yeah, I mean, we would need to go through here and see, okay, what is reasonable? But it's not a scientific.
Yeah, I
it's
don't know
gonna-
how you would get even 4% precise.
It just says.
It's always gonna be an estimate in terms of staff
Exactly.
allocation.
But it's, I think it'll at least will give us an idea of sense.
Well, and I think there was a board question last time about if the recreation sports programs were paying for themselves. And this helped me to see that, at least in this year, they were, in terms of the income generated and then the cost to.
It was, no,
Yes,
no.
well, if you break down what they took in versus the actual amount, if you don't, you can't take out the staff. If you just look at the cost to run the program in terms of the officials, the,
So you're not talking about the staff? You
No.
don't wanna
I mean, you could,
But if you include the staff, you could see that it was $73,000 for property taxes that we had to add into the rec programs.
yes.
So they didn't bring in all the money.
So,
I
yeah,
don't know, I mean, how much staff time is for those recreation programs though?
Well, that's what.
well,
that's-
under this model, $106,000 of salaries were devoted. Most of our recreation staff is supporting programs.
Right.
So like most of,
Yeah, you look at the soccer refs.
or just our, even our full-time staff, like
Okay.
John and Mel, yeah. I mean, particularly in John's case, almost, I don't know, I'm throwing out a number, so it's because I haven't asked him, but 95% would be
Yeah,
for
at
rec
least
programs.
90%, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we do, our programs.
So you have the 73,000 from property taxes, and then you had at the bottom another $23,000. So those two amounts were added.
Right,
So in addition to all the money that the programs brought in, we had to add in almost another 96,000 to cover all the recreation program.
yes,
So,
yeah,
Would it be helpful, like, cause I see where you're going with this and our budget, you know, when we get the budget numbers or whatever, we can isolate like soccer, for example, cause I know all the soccer staff costs, right? Not the full-time, not the office
Yeah.
staff costs, but
Yeah,
I call them the kids. There's some adults that do it too, but the kids, right? I can identify that easily and break it out and show,
Yeah,
like, hey,
it-
soccer took in X number of dollars, and if we only look at non-office staff time,
well, yeah, that's what,
it cost X number of dollars, right? And it makes $120,000. Or what, right?
huh?
So I can isolate that too. That's a very simple, I think I already have it.
that would be like if we were looking at each program then specifically.
Individually, exactly.
That's even-
But we can show that, and then
Okay.
we can show the total numbers with,
So.
you know, as we're seeing them with the staff, you know, office staff time added in.
So
Right.
I guess the issue is, on a direct cost standpoint, it's pretty easy to determine.
Uh-huh.
We track revenue individually, we track expenses individually. Once we factor in the overhead, and when I say like departmental overhead, like Mel and John and Bree, that's where you have to start making some assumptions,
And
right?
I think our assumptions are reasonable.
Yeah, and then, you know, but there have been some things that will have changed. So if I did this, if you said this is the level of analysis that you're interested in, we can use this model. I would recommend we would do it after July 1st, and then you would use actuals for 24, 25. And then when you looked at this again next, you'd say, okay, this isn't budget, this isn't based on the budget, it's based on what actually occurred last year, and look at the assumptions that we made. And again, I think the assumptions are not gonna be 100% bulletproof, but you know, they help guide us.
Yeah. Just can you please remind me, I cannot remember what the program incomes for.
So I listed up here, program income is gonna be concerts in the park, scoot and skate camp. At the time, it would have been Living the Dream.
Yeah.
Okay, so Living the Dream was in there.
At that time.
We didn't
yes.
hold one this
We didn't
year.
have one in that year.
Well, to 2021. No, we did not have
So
one.
that number is gonna even go down then.
So is program income, is that funds that you get from TRF? Does that ever show up in here?
It would
No,
have,
so that's more like, so we have soccer, basketball, we have like the flagship programs, right? Ideally, concerts would have its own line. It's always surprising that it doesn't, right? But program income is more of the sort of generic base, right?
smaller programs.
Smaller
So
programs.
Concert in the Park, I think probably should get its own line because that should be easy enough, right, to figure out.
I would have to talk to Natalie about that, cause I don't.
It would be easy,
know.
it just wouldn't, it may not be able to do it retroactively. And we may not be able to do it retroactive, because those have already been, we've already received a lot of money. from
Oh, I
Housing
see.
Park. So-
Okay.
But we could do that going forward, and then, you'd have.
I just
And
wanna
part
know
of the
that
issue-
program income breakdown.
We can show that,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Part of the issue with concerts in the park is it happens over 2 fiscal years.
Yeah.
Right, so we'll have, as we look at real numbers, right, we'll have generic program income in there for you.
Okay, so
But if we
because,
start isolating it for the future, right, it would start looking like, July and August, right? And then in another year, a year and a half, 2 years later, we'll start to see June as well, so.
But you can see here these big round numbers, because this was based on a budget, not actually what we took in.
yeah. So, okay, so my concern is that it did include some of the, if it included the living the dream.
Does-
Well, we wouldn't have held the Living the Dream, so we wouldn't have programmed it. We didn't hold one in 2020.
But it was in there though.
Well, it's in there, that's where we deposit Living the Dream up until this past year, waiting to program income, but in this fiscal year, there wasn't one.
Yeah. Oh,
There
Now we
wasn't,
have the fundraising.
But it
Line
would
but
have
we're gonna have to add the line.
Fundraising line item.
Yes, it would be a fundraiser.
This season we didn't, this year we didn't have it, because we just added it for
Okay.
this current fiscal.
Okay, I see, okay,
Does,
but.
no, do funds that you get from TRF show up here? And if
They
so,
would be in, yes,
It-
so like TRF, would, at the time we ran.
It would have been under
Living
program
the Dream,
income,
so
right?
that would go there. TRF would donate to scholarship funds, and so those would be in the specific like soccer, basketball, softball, flag, football, right?
Oh, so they don't
scholarship
have their
funds.
own,
So it wouldn't be like a total number of what TRF donated.
So TRF dictates how they donate the money.
got
The
it.
TRF can say, we wanna sponsor kids through scholarships, or we wanna sponsor a soccer team. And if the scholarships are used for soccer, it'll show up in.
They'll show up
the
in
beer,
soccer
but-
income.
But the beer run money and the
Yeah.
TRF,
So beer run would be in program income.
yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the TRF, the 13,000, I'm sorry, the Living the Dream, the 13,000 that we got,
It has its own line item now,
it'd be,
fundraising.
okay, so, so beer money would be under the fundraising as well.
Beer money's always fundraising.
Okay. So pretty much the program income, so what's gonna be remain of the program income?
Well, we do things like scoot camp, skate camp,
Okay.
just smaller
Okay,
programs.
so that
don't
makes
have their
sense,
own-
that would be our rec, okay,
Concerts,
so that would be good.
And
that
we
would
we
be
can
good.
look at adding, separating concerts.
Okay, no, that's good, so that would be it, okay.
Yeah, it's gonna be easier to do so going forward than it is looking back, because these costs have already, if you wanna pull concerts out, both on the revenue side and on the expense side, we need to start coding all the revenues and expenses to that line item. And it'll be easier to do that in a going forward way than a looking backwards way.
And then I just wanna know, so, I mean, I guess I just wanna make sure that I understand this properly. So is it fair to say for this year that the programs were ended up being short by $96,000?
I would say that the rec programs needed $73,000 of property taxes and $23,000 of solid waste franchise fees
Okay.
to break even.
Okay,
that-
that's,
does that-
okay, that's what, okay,
Once we assign
Yes.
the overhead costs.
okay,
And the property tax, that's determined, the amount that they get is determined by the service district or?
yes,
So let me try to, I'll try to describe this in a bigger way, a bigger picture way. The overall amount that the TCSD receives in property taxes is based on the tax rate that was determined at the time areas were annexed. So we have like 12 tax rate areas, so each one's a tiny bit different. That comes to us in one check for about $1.5 million a year. The amount of property taxes that go to Parks and Recreation and fire and a little bit goes to streetlights is determined by the board. That is 100% discretionary. It's just not been it's been pretty consistent for many years. It's based on an established split.
So we don't get from the actual properties, that they just
No,
make a
when you,
determination that.
yeah, when you write a check
Yeah.
to the county for your property, you have property taxes due on April 10th.
Yeah.
You're gonna write a big check. We're gonna get about 8.4 cents per dollar of that check that you write to the county back to us.
Wow. So the rest is all county.
Well, schools, primarily schools,
Oh.
schools, county. Other taxing entities, there's about a dozen.
okay.
Got it.
Any other questions? Okay, directions clear?
Yeah, I think so.
That's good, okay, great. So, review. Okay, spring programs update.
Ooh, my time to shine. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Taking notes? Extensive. Softball and T-ball opens tomorrow, Saturday. Saturday opening day, assuming it's not rained so much the fields are unusable. Also picture day. So they'll be doing pictures in the morning over at Bethel Park, assuming it's usable. If not, we'll just move them into our Lens Place facility. We've got flag registration, flag football registration starts next week, very exciting, March 17th. That will go through May, yes, because flag football, then we'll put the teams together in early June, practice starts, and then games, June, July, August. We have a California Park and Rec Society conference, John and I are attending next week also, March 17th to the 21st. Which is always a good time to get together with like-minded folks and gather all of this information you're requesting of us. And meet with some vendors. They have a great vendor, expo hall. They set up actual playgrounds that we get to play on, ninja courses, happy hours, it's fantastic. Pops and soda pops. But like, there's like, restrooms in there and, all the drinking fountain things that we're looking at for the parks, for park improvement plan coming up. Monster Skate, the Central Coast Monster Skate Park Series, is in its 20-something year, and we are going to be opening it in Templeton on April 5th. So Templeton will open and we'll move to Atascadero, Los Osos, Napomo, and close it down in San Luis Obispo this year. Next year, I think we're gonna add 2 more stops to that. But we're opening, it is also the 25th anniversary of the Templeton Skate Park this year, so we're gonna try to bring some of the guys out that were involved in sort of designing the park, right, give them a little show. So have those folks out there, should be lots of fun. Earth Day is April 22nd, and we're having a very first ever Earth Day event for the rec department. Doing some work out at the garden. We've got Home Depot putting some team, they have a Home Depot team effort that will come out hopefully in 2 parts. One to do some general destruction and cleanup of the garden. And then a second date to come out and build some of those garden boxes that we were talking about. And really kind of build out a bit of the garden to make it pretty again. That will be in conjunction with the Earth Day event where we're gonna have a few sort of vendor booths, although they're not selling anything. Waste management is involved. They're gonna hand out some information on recycling and all the things. We have the environmental club from the high school coming out to do activities with kids. We're doing some rock painting to line the new pathway in the garden. We're gonna put the kids' rocks out on the pathway. Some potential oak trees are going up, so should be very exciting for that. And then May 3rd is Clutter to Cash. So we'll have, last year I think we had about 100 residents on there. That is the community-wide yard sale that we participate in. And also it's softball season that whole time that I was just talking about. So games at Evers, Monday, Wednesday, Saturdays through May 10th. Very exciting. We are also looking to start our senior club back up. So we were just talking to Sandy Cowell, who used to work here actually. She is interested in taking a bit of the lead role on starting up senior club again. Historically, so we operated this up until COVID basically. And then some of our seniors during COVID aged significantly. And so bringing it back was very difficult. We had to start finding some new senior leaders, right? So Sandy was willing to do it, and this was a group that met once a month, although we would be able to meet more frequently if they wanted to, on Fridays. At the
What was the
community
age
center.
group?
Senior club, so
We're getting close.
active active adults who are of retirement age. So we would meet once a month and we'd have a bit of a program for them, and then they'd bring their own sort of snacks and refreshments for some social time after. Because that is one of the things that seniors tend to miss out on as they age, right? So the presentations could be anything. It could be me talking about youth programs in Templeton. We'd have the Chamber of Commerce come out. Jeff came out and spoke about goings on with the district. We'd have the Friends of the Elephant Seals come out. We have the Atascadero Canine Units. We have just a really cool class. And so they would do sort of a class for about an hour and, ask questions. Some, Echo came out, the homeless shelter. And then they would be able to hang out and we'd have like ukulele club come perform for them or have Christmas parties and games for them, right? So it's a pretty cool little
This,
club,
this
small
event
mighty.
wasn't ran like a class, it was a TCSD hosted.
It was our.
So we kind of, I guess, coordinated the speaker a little bit. Set up a couple tables, opened up the building. It's not a high demand thing, and it happens during the daytime. But there's no hard cost, there's just some time spent organizing it.
Coordinating efforts and getting information from them about what they want to hear about. So,
Encourage them to come to the service district meetings.
and I'm sorry.
Encourage them to come to the service district
Yes,
meetings.
exactly, right? It was also board member recruitment and, so yeah, that's sort of been big on the agenda or, on
That
the
would be nice.
to-do list for us. So just getting that back going. So,
Thank you.
yeah, that's what we have going on.
Appreciate it. Good. Any questions? Okay, good. Future agenda items, do you have any? Perfect.
No, you go first.
I'm sure you have the best.
No, I mean, no, it's not.
Okay, so I know we had talked about maintenance of the buildings previously. I don't know where that stands, so like if we could get an
Like
update.
some improvements.
Yeah.
They made it onto that work plan that's in the strategic plan.
Oh, okay, we
Yeah,
gotta,
they're listed in there. So
So-
we can update you on
But-
progress. on-
yeah, yes, yeah, okay, so because I know we wanna get going on that. I don't know if this would be. Oh, I'm
Can I
sorry.
make a recommendation? Because there were some things that I originally had on this agenda that I took off because of time constraints.
Oh, so don't put too many.
Well, I want to throw out what I was planning on doing with getting you
Okay.
some feedback, because one of the things, there seemed to be some confusion about Everest Park and, that's why I wanted to kind of go over what was Brightview and what was MIG and what's really coming. But it seems to me there might be some value in this committee, every time you meet, to go actually visit a facility. And that way you have sort of a collective real-time view.
Okay.
And so I was thinking that over the next several meetings, maybe we start the meeting here, then we take a little road trip and then you come back and discuss. In order to discuss it, you've got, in order for us to capture those discussions, we would prefer to do most of the discussion here, but we can do a tour and maybe we can actually do that. I don't know how many we're gonna get in this year, but Everest Park, German Park, the community center garden area. Maybe one every meeting that you have, and you can tell us what's the most important. You may not even get to all of those this year, but it seems like that gives everyone sort of a collective view. You're not reliant on what you remember seeing.
Okay,
I think that's a great idea.
that's perfect.
Do we have a set meeting schedule for this committee?
No, all the committees are on a as needed basis, and so what the bylaws say is the expectation is you're gonna meet like 2 to 4 times a year. Minimum, at one time was set to be a minimum of 2. Some committees having to meet a little bit more, some committees have met a little bit less. But if there's some items that are pressing and you wanna set a date now, we're probably
Because-
capable of doing that.
Because you did say you have some items that you wanted.
Yeah, I wanted to include a site visits of Everest Park before we started talking about
Yeah.
other
Oh, I see.
items, but we talked about them anyway. But maybe we could go to German Park next, because we've spent time on Everest Park. There really are some obvious needs at German Park. Particularly once you start, like, there are no street improvements at German Park. And yet, when we have soccer there, 30-40% of the people who are going are parking on the street. There's not even a sidewalk into the park. There's no pedestrian access to the park.
Actually, it's not even clean over there.
So anyway, they're just different, and I think, just as an example, we have these facilities and I think it might be handy to actually spend a little time walking them. And plus, it gives Justin or whomever an opportunity to talk about the improvements that we've recently made, maintenance wise, those kinds of things. Like, I will recommend that when you go to Everest Park next, look at the eastern border. We still have, we have these, when the park was first built, it was constructed with these very large telephone poles that held up this big screening to prevent balls from going onto the railroad tracks. Well, over time, all that netting became deteriorated and just looked awful. It was just hanging and pretty much worthless anyway. This past winter or this, December or early January, all of that was removed.
It looks a lot better, I was there, so
It cleaned it
It's
up
a
a lot.
big improvement.
It was a big effort, but it cleaned it up a lot. There's really not a need to have it. We went back and looked at all the requirements. We think it was done to, to appease the railroad or whatever, but it's not in a, it doesn't appear to be a mandate to maintain that. So we've removed it. We don't have a big problem with
And yeah, since
softballs don't go over the fence. No one's
Since
launching a
it
400-foot home run.
it deteriorated and came down, we haven't had any issues that, would have sort of necessitated its use, right?
Yeah,
Or its
it was-
existence.
David Beckham is not scoring goals
Yeah,
against that headwind.
One other item was that I was interested, we've talked a little bit now about the community center, its use and its cost and. I think it's a facility is there, I think it's nice, if we could maybe figure out a way to make it more productive.
I have noticed recently it's been getting more and more use, which is nice. We're starting to increase some of the rentals for, there's been a couple of funeral services there. There's been a couple of, wedding reception.
I think
or
we had
Quince Day
inquiries from
reception.
Weight Watchers to hold like a twice weekly meeting there. I don't know if that actually,
Yeah.
do you know if that
I don't
happened?
know, but I know that they.
We've had a lot of back and forth.
It could be possible too, because Legion Hall is shutting down
Oh, yeah,
for a
right,
little,
right.
yeah, so.
Yeah, in
Maybe-
June, right? That's still
Yeah,
slated for June.
still,
So it
yeah.
has been increasing slow and steadily, right?
That's good.
We do have, there's some, Little Bird's music out there too, so.
Churches, we major in
Couple
the
churches.
kitchen
churches,
part is not
church
really-
rentals,
The kitchen.
not much.
I think we could, it is, yeah, it's,
No, cause it's not ours. She is, they have their own website. They haven't asked us to advertise it though. I can reach
But
out
why
to them.
would, I mean, just.
Cause I don't have a lot of contact with them. So the community center is rented through the district here,
Yeah, it's
Maya
not-
really. And I just notice, I have the calendar, or notice when there's activity in there.
Who maintains the booking?
Maya.
Maya.
yeah, the
I think
district office.
I think it would be
It-
valid, like on
yeah.
our reservation requests, there used to be a section that said, would you like this activity listed in the guide, right? So we could probably add something pretty easily to a reservation request that, would you like this listed on the website, or you have a flyer for listing this on their website or something, so.
But I mean, yeah, we could just figure out maybe, especially since we're doing analyzing the budget anyways, like some sort of, center, so that way we could figure out what.
Yeah, so again, its income is gonna be buried in like rentals.
No,
It
it's
is-
not specific, it doesn't say.
I mean,
Oh.
well, we could probably carve it out if we put some effort into it. But it doesn't have its own fund. It's all, its activities are combined in these funds.
And
Its
we-
expenses as well.
We even at one time talked about looking at, which we did, look at the contract because it was donated to us
Hmm.
many years ago, and then as part of that, we're supposed to maintain it. So
Well,
we
I-
don't really, I guess, I guess we own
Yeah,
it,
that's
but
good.
there's some.
There's a perpetual agreement to make it available to the Templeton Charitable Women's Club at no cost. So for that group, we actually go set the building up, take the stuff down, et cetera. Everybody else we charge and they do their own setup.
Could we get, we're saying that it's hard to parse out the budget information for that. Could we get information about like the scheduling of it, how?
Yes, we can have, we actually, that's come to the committee before, like how often it's used.
Yeah, I mean, we'll give you like the
Yeah.
specifics, but it's a ballpark about.
And then.
We have a lot of, we have churches and church groups that use it.
Pretty
Are
frequently.
they using it again?
Yeah,
Yeah,
twice
there's
on
a
Sundays,
lot
once on
going-
Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are our most significant users are the churches.
So it seems like it's picking up a little bit, so that's good. And then, of course, we have to have the update on Everest Park.
Everest Park.
That has to be on the agenda.
Agendas.
Anything else you wanna? And then you have a couple of items you wanted to add.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to do like a site visit and then focus on, just so that
Okay.
you have a good kind of running knowledge and
The-
can help us. So for example, if we're gonna have a discussion on the community center, maybe that's the day that we actually visit the community center.
Yeah. exactly.
And you're right, a lot of things have changed. I think that was built at a different time when there was this vision that these community groups would be hosting all these luncheons and that people
Yeah.
come and make food. And I think our society's just really changed since then, where we like get to go food and, I mean, even the groups that use it, that have meals, there's almost no cooking that takes place.
Yeah.
They hire a caterer, they pick something up.
Which, I mean, it'd be interesting, so you have all that space for the kitchen that's not being used, so if you kind of make it. Can you take it out and?
Well, we did have one group, the oven had
Yeah, I
ceased to
know,
work.
yeah.
And I said, I'm not, it's like so expensive.
Yeah.
We tried fixing, and we had a group that used it, and said, I need that oven,
Yeah,
and so we
just one
replaced it.
group, for one group, we spent $7,000-8,000.
What were they using it for?
Keeping their food warm
Yeah.
for like a monthly meal,
That's called the little burners.
yeah, so.
Um,
Nobody's like running it like a commercial kitchen.
The only thing I would like us to just maybe continue to talk about is brainstorming and sharing outreach and marketing efforts. So like the things I talked about being on the website and other like proactive steps that we can. Because I just keep thinking, if you were to just move to Templeton, how would you know about any of these things? A lot of it seems to be dependent on word of mouth for other residents, and I think we could just dedicate a little bit of time to thinking about creating more.
Are you talking also looking at creating more programs too, or?
I mean, at the very least, I think we should create better processes for advertising the programs and events we do have.
Okay.
We can add, that wouldn't be hard, it's a picture, we can even show you how the website works and what's there, and getting input about, well,
Yeah.
why isn't this here, then great, cause sometimes when you're in the weeds,
Yeah.
like we are, we fail to see
Yeah.
it from the broader perspective, so, yeah, making good notes here,
Yeah.
those are things we can do.
Okay, thank you. Did you wanna set up the meeting now or wait?
I didn't hear anything super pressing,
Yeah.
but it, if we wanna, we can look at our schedule and say we can do something and, I don't know how often this committee you want to.
Well, I know for this, we would need to meet, which would probably be sometime in August.
Well, we need the books to close and the numbers to settle, that's our auditor's term. So, yeah, like, end of the summer, August, September, somewhere in there, the audit figures won't be done till later, but yeah, we can do other things.
So what quarter are we right now?
We're in March,
In March.
so maybe May, June, somewhere in there.
Yeah,
Okay,
because then we could also talk about if there's any
okay,
things that we are anticipating be a red flag for the budget before they provide us with the.
get an update in terms of what we wanna put on the
Yeah.
budget. We talked about that actually.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
how we wanna make sure that everything is included in
Yeah.
the budget, but we need to get that. You're starting work on the
Yeah,
budget.
yeah, that's already underway.
Yeah.
That's good.
Alright, so you could send that schedule thing.
Yeah, we could.
So May, yeah, sometime in May, I think. Alright. Okay. Anything else? Alright, meeting adjourned. Thank you, guys.
Sorry for